Okay, today we're going to be talking about properties of real numbers. This is a very vocabulary intensive lesson, and because it's so challenging, I'd say to keep all of these in mind, the first thing I'm going to do is help you to set up an account so that you can make some flashcards to study. So like your homework tonight is going to be to make these flashcards. That's a big part of it. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do, and I'm going to show you along at the same time, I'm going to ask that you go to the website Quizlet, Quizlet.com, Quizlet.com. So I want you to go there, and then you're going to have a chance, if you already have made an account in the past, you can just log in. You can sign up, or you can log in with your Facebook account. So any of those is fine. So if you haven't made an account, you might want to sign up for it. So again, you could sign up with Facebook, or just fill out your username, password, retype email, or retype the password, put it in your email, and hit sign up. Once you've signed up, you can go ahead and hit login. Okay, so I'm going to log in with mine so I can show you what's going to happen. And I log in, and you can see that I've already made a few sets of flashcards, but you are going to create a set of flashcards. So you're going to hit create set and give your flashcard set a title. And a good title might be like properties of real numbers, because we're talking about the real number properties today. Algebra lesson 2.5, that might be my description. Okay, you can put a subject if you want, math. You can leave it open for set discussion or not if you want it visible to everyone or just you or classes. That's your choice. And then we're going to come down here and enter our flashcards. Choose the language you must do. So we're going to probably do English in both sides, because I'm not having you switch from subject to subject. And in here we're going to type our properties and what they mean. I'll come back and do that in a minute after I show you a couple properties. So let's go back into the properties. And I'll talk about a few properties first. And then when I've talked a few, I'll show you how to enter it and how to save and all that good stuff. Okay, so some of our properties of real numbers today. The first one I want you to know is the commutative property of addition. And the commutative property of addition says that a plus b equals b plus a. All of these I like to put in like my own words, easy words to remember. All that means is you're allowed to switch the order of numbers when you add. So like 3 plus 7 and 7 plus 3, they both equal 10. You're allowed to switch it in any order when you add. You get the same answer. Okay. The commutative property of multiplication, same thing. That just says a times b equals b times a. You're allowed to switch the order when you multiply, and you get the same answer. You're going to notice we don't have commutative property for subtraction or division, because that's not true. Like 5 divided by 10 and 10 divided by 5, they're different answers. So we don't have a property like that. But commutative property, it works for adding and multiplying. Here we have the associative property of addition. This says the quantity a plus b plus c equals a plus the quantity b plus c. The associative property says that we're allowed to regroup terms when we add, so we can add a different number set first, and that's okay. So we can put different things in parentheses. You're going to notice that this property also works for multiplication. Okay, I'm going to come back to this in a moment, and I'm going to show you a step on how to do this with your flashcard, because it's probably really smart if you're making your flashcards as we go. So I'm going to go back into Quizlet, and here we are. I'm going to start with putting my property name on the left here. So I'm going to say commutative property of addition. And in here, I'm going to do something that's going to help me remember what this means. So I might say you're allowed to switch the order when you add. And then I'm going to give myself an example. 3 plus 2 equals the same thing as 2 plus 3. Okay, because I think that's going to help me if I make an example. Then I'm going to go down to the next row here when I'm ready for the next one. I probably don't want to call that additions. Okay. There are 12 properties today, so you're going to be making like 12 of these, and you'll add row at the end every time you want to add another row or tab. And then when you're done, you're going to hit create set. It's probably not going to let me create this set yet, because I think you have at least two. So I'll add another one. Let's call commutative property of multiplication. And there I'm going to say you can switch the order when you multiply. And it's good if you write this in your own words so you can remember what it is. 2 times 5 equals 5 times 2. Okay, now I think it's going to let me create my set. And when you create your set, you're going to get something nice like this, a flashcard. If you click both sides, you see them both at once, but if you just click one side, this can really be a great way to help you study. You're allowed to switch the order when you add 3 plus 2 equals 2 plus 3, and you're thinking, okay, what does that mean? Well, that one's commutative property of addition. You can check and see if you're right by just clicking on it, and then move on to get to the next one. If you'd rather have your term first, because you'll have to know it both ways this class, you could have there and then click to flip and see what it means. So it's going to make a nice set like that for you, and there's different games to help you practice. So it's a great site. I hope you take some advantage of it. Let me talk you through the rest of the properties, and then you'll get to work on making them and studying them a little bit. Okay, so here we are at associative property of multiplication. So again, you're allowed to regroup when you multiply. You can put them in any order. The identity property of addition, this just says a plus 0 equals a. Anything plus 0 is itself. If you add 0 to something, it doesn't change its identity. Okay, it keeps who it was. The identity property of multiplication, it says a times 1 equals a. In other words, anything times 1 is itself. So if you don't want to change something's identity when you multiply, you're allowed to multiply it by 1. It's called the identity property of multiplication. Yep, we still have more properties. Like I told you, there were 12 of them, and that's why it gets overwhelming and good to make your little flashcards. Okay, the inverse property of addition says that for every a, so every number that exists, there's an additive inverse. And if you remember, we said another word for additive inverse was its opposite, so negative a. Such as if you add a plus negative a, you get 0. So that means a number plus its opposite is 0. So anytime you add a number and its opposite, you always get 0. 5 plus negative 5 is 0. Negative 3/5 plus 3/5 is 0. The inverse property of multiplication, it says that for every a except for the number 0, so a can't equal 0, there's a multiplicative inverse. And if you remember from a few days ago, another word for multiplicative inverse is reciprocal. We have 1 over a, such that a times 1 over a equals 1. So every time you multiply a number by its reciprocal, you get 1. 5 times 1/5 is 1. 3/2 times 2/3, that's 1. Okay, every time a number times its reciprocal, it always equals 1. Yes, I know, there's even more properties. The symmetric property just says if a equals b, then b equals a. You're allowed to switch what's on each side of the equal sign. A lot of times you might see this as a problem, like you might say if 2 plus 3 equals 5, which we know that's true, then we're allowed to switch the sides. We could still say 5 equals 2 plus 3. So you're allowed to just flip the two sides of the equal sign. Switch them to what's on the left to the right and what's on the right to the left, and you're still going to get a problem that is the same. Okay, so those will equal each other. Let's erase that for a second. Okay. The distributive property, we've worked on this, so you know that you can take a number outside of the parentheses, this a, and multiply it by what's inside the parentheses, b plus c. So if you have a times the quantity b plus c, that's the same thing as a times b plus a times c. And remember, this works if you switch the order around, and it works for subtraction too, but then we have a minus sign in there instead of a plus. Other than that, it's exactly the same. Finally, here we are at the last slide of properties. So the multiplication property of 0, this just says if you have any real number n times 0 equals 0. Any number times 0 is always 0. That's always true. You multiply a number by 0, you get 0. The multiplication property of -1, that says for every real number n, so any number that exists, if you multiply it by -1, you get -n. So -1 times n equals -n. Every number times -1 is its opposite. So let me give you a couple examples on this one because people do mess up on this a lot. If you do 5 times -1, you get -5, which is its opposite. But if we do like -6 times -1, you're going to get +6. It's opposite. So like a -6, remember we mentioned this when we were doing our adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing rules. A -n, like a -6 equals +6. Okay, so that's useful to know. Okay, let me get rid of that, and then we'll work on a couple examples that I'd like you to try in your graph notebook. The other ones can just all be on your Quizlet, that's fine. Okay, so some examples I want you to try and see if you can get this. Name the property each equation illustrates. You might have to look in your flashcards for now, but I want you to be able to do this without looking it up in the next few days. So 3 times A equals A times 3. So you're asking yourself, what's the difference? The only thing they did differently is they switched the order that those were multiplied in. So if you think back, which one is switching the order? This is called the commutative property, and it's of multiplication because it's being multiplied here. The commutative property of multiplication. Okay, so that's what that illustrates. Okay, B. P times 0 equals 0. Okay, that's just all it's saying there is what times 0 equals 0. That's the multiplication property of 0. That says anything times 0 always equals 0. Okay. All right, and then the next one, 6 plus -6 equals 0. So this looks like it's saying a number plus its opposite equals 0. That one's called the additive inverse property. Or I think I gave you the technical name before, which might be the inverse property of addition. Inverse property. So if you want to write that instead, inverse property of addition, that's okay. I was shortcutting it a little bit. And D, okay, 5 plus the quantity 4 plus 1 equals the quantity 5 plus 4 plus 1. If you do the math here, you'll see like 5 plus 5 equals 9 plus 1. They really do both equal 10. And if you check that out, all we did is we regrouped it differently, so that's called the associative property. And I was adding in that case. So this was the associative property of addition. Okay, so it's nice for you to know how these properties work. That's the most important thing, but I do want you to be able to name them too because we're working on our math vocab and trying to be able to speak it fluently. I gotta get rid of those. And then let me see if I give you just a couple examples where where using one of these properties might come in handy. So suppose you buy a shirt for $14.85 and a pair of pants for $21.95. And your job is to figure out, and a pair of shoes for $25.15. Use the property as a mental math to find the total amount you spend. So we've got $14.85 plus $21.95 plus $25.15. I want to use some mental math because I'm not allowed to work this out if I'm doing it to make this problem easier for myself. So this is all adding, so I know that I'm allowed to change the order when I add. So I'm going to add this and this first because $14.85 and $25.15, I think that's going to be pretty easy to add in my head because 85 cents plus 15 cents is just $1. So I'm thinking of that like basically I might rethink of that problem like 15 plus 25 basically because I'm adding the extra dollar in. So $14.85 plus $25.15, that's going to give me $40. And then I can add $21.95, and that's probably a problem you can do in your head, at $61.95. Using the properties in that case of the commutative property came in really nicely, made us be able to do that problem in our head. Okay, so, we're going to stop right there, and I want you to make sure your Quizlet site is looking good and you've got all your properties and you're ready to practice them in class. And this is tough, so put a little extra effort in. All right, see you soon.